I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bree Rivera. I'm a former ADE K-12 Science Specialist, and I am doing some webinars to help out the ADE as they are transitioning into finding a new K-12 Science Specialist. Currently, you can find me at Mesa Public Schools. I am the Secondary Science Specialist for the district. I'm so excited that you're all here. Today we're going to really be looking at the standards and start the process of you guys thinking about taking these standards and then turning them into classroom instruction. So it is helpful to have a little bit of a background in three-dimensional science instruction so that you do understand why those components are important into your lesson or unit plan. And on the ADE website, the first two webinars done after the standards adoption are recorded and they are on the website. When you go to download the standards document, they're right there on that page, so you don't have to go find them anywhere. And if after today, if you're like, man, I really think I do need to know more about 3D science instruction, go ahead and you can view those webinars there. Real quick question, were any of you here for any of those webinars with me? Okay, Melissa, so you got to see the one on the framework, which does talk about 3D science instruction, so that's good. Okay. All right, that's good information to know, so I will, hi Whitney, hi again. I will try to go through some parts a little bit slower when I'm describing them. So again, like I said, I'm very excited to go through this webinar with you and go over the 5 tools and processes for translating our Arizona Science Standards into instruction. So this webinar is for those of you who have a good feeling about the document and you feel like you can navigate it pretty well, and now you want to try to turn it into something useful for your classroom. So this is for you guys who are ready for the next steps. This is one way of doing so. I like it because it's very organized. You'll see that there are 5 steps to creating unit plans that include three-dimensional science instruction, phenomena, and the 5E model. This is not the only way to do it. This is one way that I can give you these resources because they're all free, and they're all free through the 3 companies that you see on the screen. This process was developed by BSCS in partnership with the American Museum of Natural History and WestEd. And the American Museum of Natural History is the one who actually houses all of the resources on their website. You don't need a login or anything. They're just there for you for free. So before we start with Tool 1, I'm just going to go over the whole process with you. We are going to start with Tool 1, which is using the Arizona Science Standards to plan a unit of instruction, and we are going to make a 3D unit blueprint. The second tool is going to kind of start the backwards planning process where you write evidence of learning specifications, and that's going to get you to see what the student should know and be able to do by the end of the unit. It's not the full assessment, it's just kind of like an idea that you have in mind, the end goal, where students should be. Once you have those written, then Tool 3 is using the 5E instructional model to develop a conceptual flow. So you're going to choose your phenomena and create a storyline for your unit. Tool 4 is going to be, again, using the 5E instructional model to develop learning sequences and picking those resources that you'll be using in your unit. And lastly, Tool 5 is creating your unit assessment with those evidence of learning specifications in mind and the resources and the way that you taught the lesson in mind. So Tool 5 is at the end. So let's begin with Tool 1. Now, the purpose of Tool 1 is to help teachers develop an understanding of the 3 dimensions of the Arizona Science Standard. So as you do Tool 1, you're really going to pick apart that 3-dimensionality of the standard and really make sure that all those pieces fit in your plan. So you need to look at the disciplinary core ideas in science and engineering, and you're going to really look at the cross-cutting concepts and the science and engineering practices to really develop a blueprint and a good understanding of what those standards mean before you select resources and go any further. So to begin this process, we think about how you currently teach a science topic. So I want to know, what do you think about when planning a unit of instruction for your classroom? What are some really key components that you need to know before you can start to plan a unit of instruction? Good, so we have some that we need to really look at the standards and then think about the objectives for the students. What is their unknown vocabulary? So what are you going to need to focus on? What materials do you have to teach this lesson? What materials and resources are even available for you? You need to plan time for students to apply what they're learning. Good, student engagement. What are students' learning styles? What you want the students to be able to come away with at the end, so you have your end goal in mind, and maybe you need to come up with some formative assessment along the way to make sure that they're getting there. Good, we have misconceptions in there. What are students' misconceptions? What do they already know? What's their prior knowledge? You guys came up with a great list. I would say all of those are important. Some things that are new now when you're thinking about planning your lesson to our new standards is the core ideas and how they're laid out, the science and engineering practices, those hands-on activities, and how students are going to apply that knowledge. The cross-cutting concepts, how are students going to make connections to other content areas? How are they going to make that learning visible for you? And I've got a few resources to help you out with that. Phenomena and student engagement. You guys kind of said that one, just didn't pick out the word phenomena, but we're going to call that phenomena. That's going to be threaded throughout your unit to make sure that students understand why they are learning what they're learning and why it's important that they're learning what they're learning. And this one is not necessary, but for this process, the 5E model does have a role. So today I would like to really make sure that we deepen our understanding of the Arizona Science Standard and increase your abilities to plan for a very coherent instruction based on these science standards. So I'm going to give you an idea of the end goal in mind. So if you do Tool 1 and you create a unit blueprint, it's going to look something like this at the end. And this example is the example that you're going to see on the American Museum of Natural History's website. So it is tailored more for NGSS, but I do have an example to show you with how it is used with the Arizona Science Standard. So here you would start with your standard, and these are the standards that is sampled here in this lesson or in this unit. Here is our learning progression for this unit, and I'll show you where you can get that learning progression. The science and engineering practices are taken into account, as well as the cross-cutting concepts, the using science, and then at the end we kind of have our big idea sequence for learning at the bottom. And I just kind of wanted to show you the big picture before I start breaking it down into its smaller components. Okay, so the first thing that we need to figure out is, what do students need to know and understand about this topic? So when we're looking at the three dimensions, which are the core ideas, the science engineering practices, and the cross-cutting concepts. So when we always ask, what do students need to know, we're really looking at those core ideas, because the core ideas are what is traditionally thought of as science content. Now, the science and engineering practices are similar to the abilities to do scientific inquiry, or the hands-on, or what students are doing to apply what they're learning. Some might refer to them as skills, but our new standards encourages us to think about these as practices, as ways of knowing and developing understanding. The cross-cutting concepts are similar to the unifying concepts in the 2004 standards. And then we have engineering built into the standards, and they can be seen anytime we have a standard coded U2. And that really does represent a significant shift in our thinking about the focus of science education. Now, the teacher working groups who developed our standards have also included explicit connections to using science as well as engineering and technology, and then those applications of science. So the key idea here is that the Arizona Science Standards promote an integration of the dimensions, the three dimensions, to offer students a deeper understanding of the whole of science and the applications of science and engineering. And that's a mouthful. That's a lot to think about as you are planning a unit. And one reason why I really enjoy this process is because right here in Tool 1, you're going to think about all of that and organize it in a way that really does make sense and is usable. So we're going to go through a middle school example. And we have a standard in middle school that covers ecosystems, their interactions, energy, and dynamics. And those of you that are secondary kind of help out our elementary teachers here, and let's give everyone some ideas of what do middle school students need to know and understand about ecosystems, interactions, energies, and dynamics. When they finish a unit with this kind of topic, what knowledge are they going to have when they are done? So that core idea, what are they going to know at the end? Good, you caught the keyword energy, so they're going to need to know the flow between like a food chain, maybe a food web. You saw interaction, so they need to know those symbiotic relationships, predator-prey. They need to understand that there are multiple systems within an ecosystem, so you caught one of those cross-cutting concepts on systems. They do need to know the basics of an ecosystem, kind of have that knowledge maybe before they really go into understanding their interactions and their energy. Taking it that step further and looking at the issues affecting the natural world within ecosystems and bringing in that U3, using science U3 concept. Good, they need to know biotic and abiotic factors that affect ecosystems and organisms. Those are terms right there in the standard itself, which you haven't seen yet. Good, so I would ask teachers this same question, and then I would ask them to take those initial thoughts and then turn them into more of a statement of what students need to know. And then I would ask them to write one statement on a sticky note. And they could do this in teams of 2 to 5, and then they kind of group their sticky notes together. If any are a duplicate, they can put one on top of the other or toss one of the duplicates. And now they have this great concept of what their students need to know. And then I ask them to organize it in a way that flows of learning. So where should you start with your students? What is the first concept you should teach? All the way to the end. And now everyone's in the right frame of mind to focus their efforts on what's important. So like I said when I was showing you the picture, that I want that we would now organize these group ideas into an instructional sequence that makes sense to the teacher and could be used to teach students. Really having teachers look at how do these ideas build on one another? Did you order them from concrete to abstract, and why? And now can you tell a story with these sequences? Now I would introduce them to the standard. So in this example, we're really looking at standard, 6th grade standard number 12 and 13. We would like to know with 13 to have students develop and use a model to demonstrate the interdependence of organisms and their environment, including biotic and abiotic factors. And you'll see that you guys picked out a lot of those important points when I asked you what do students need to know. I would also give my teachers the learning progression that you see here. And you can break them down into chunks of information to make it a little bit easier to understand. And then ask them to match up these different learning progressions, or I call them cards because I made them into cards, to their topics that they've already organized. And then I would ask them, is there anything missing? Do you need to add anything to your storyline? Or is there anything in here that you feel does not quite fit your storyline and is not going to add to students' learning? Go ahead and cross that out. Maybe it fits with a different unit, but for this particular unit that they want to design, maybe it does not. So just to kind of go over that again, I chop up the learning progression into bits of information, and then I ask teachers to align the learning progression to the ideas that they came up with what students should know and the order that they should learn it in. I ask them to take their biggest idea, place that at the top, and now you're going to start titling your learning sequence. What are the supporting ideas? Place that under the big idea in an instructional sequence, and now we're starting to see our unit plan develop. And what are the smaller ideas? Place those under the supporting ideas, and now we're getting a full picture of what students should be learning. So here is a real example. The main goal is always to create a unit blueprint and to break down all of those pieces of the new standards. So here are the teacher's sticky notes. And here they've gone through their progression and they've identified the key pieces that's going to guide them as they start creating their unit. Okay, so think about if you were to really do this activity. How does this deep dive into the standards really help you better plan for instruction? Like, they would probably take an hour, maybe even two, depending on how many standards they've selected for that particular unit, to really go into that learning progression and have those deep conversations about what should be taught. How does this deep dive into the standards help you better plan for instruction? Let me know in the chat box. Good. They really look at the components of the unit and see how they all depend on each other. They're identifying the learning target. I really like that you picked up on how these components depend on one another, because before with the standards, with the list of POs, it was like check off this topic, this topic, this topic, get these vocabulary words in and move on to the next topic. And there may not be that good linking of ideas. And here you're looking at how science connects, how each standards connect to each other, as well as the big picture and storyline. And yes, it does break down the standard into more manageable chunks, because when you look at that standard and you see how big and broad it is, it can be a little overwhelming. I totally get it. You're also identifying what students actually need to know versus what you think they should know. And yes, the big picture is we are ensuring coherence, making sure that we have a really good flow of information from the beginning of the unit to the end of the unit. And in this example, once the teachers have put their learning progression up into their blueprint, and I really like using the cards as manipulative so that teachers can change their mind. Nothing's set in stone. If you are going through this process and at this stage you decide, well, I'm not really happy with the order of the way that I put the standards in now, you can still move them and you can change them. I would have them now look at the standards and line up the standards in their learning sequence. So this is all of the standards in third grade. There are 8 standards in third grade. There are 1, 2, 3 physical science, 1 earth and space standard, and 4 life science standards. And they naturally kind of grouped them into their units. So for example, in this physical science part, this would be 1 unit, and they would try to find 4 or 5 lessons to make that unit. This is a second unit, third, fourth, and fifth unit that they would do in the school year. And this can look different for every site. So when the standards are numbered in the document, that's just for recording purposes. So I could say, let's work on third grade standard 4. It does not mean that you should teach them in that order, and I like that this process kind of really enforces that. There's no order that these standards need to be taught in. They need to be taught in an order that makes sense to you and your students. So this part can look different in every district or even in different classrooms. So for our teachers, the hard part is over. You have those deep conversations. You decided on an order, and sometimes that's a battle, and sometimes it's really easy to see. It just depends on the people that you're working with. So now we just spend a time on the core ideas, what students need to know. Now we need to think about those other parts of three-dimensional science instruction. So we need to get in those science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. So as we chunked this, the first thing we did was we wanted to know what students need to know and understand about the topic. Then we built from what we know and the core ideas to ensure coherent instruction. And I asked you what we can learn by studying the standards. Now, let's really look into building coherence by using the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. So, we learned about a document through an AD professional development through NSTA, and we were kind of talking about that during the sound checks. And this document kind of like breaks down the science and engineering practices into what's called elements. And it is the Appendix F of the NGSS standards. Now, we are not NGSS, but our science and engineering practices are the exact same as NGSS standards because we both used a framework for K-12 science education to write our standards. So the ADE has asked permission to have Appendix F and G, which were written by a different company and then put into the NGSS. So we contacted this company, and they're going to allow us permissions to use this same document. So as soon as that is edited and NGSS is off of it, then it will become our document too. But this is what it looks like. So this one is for the science and engineering practice of developing and using models. And it breaks down what developing and using models looks like in K2, 3.5, 6.8, and 9.12. And you can see how developmentally this science and engineering practice will continue to go through their K-12 education. And another way that I see this useful is it can help you make rubrics to determine if students are truly understanding. Now, you don't have to use all of these bullets every lesson, but maybe there are a few key lessons that or a few key bullets that you want to include into your lesson. So if you were to have a student create a food web for our sample standard, maybe you want to have students talk about the limitations of their model. Maybe you want to make sure that as you're developing your food web that students are going to be able to revise their food web model and really be able to show those relationships among variables, including those that are not observable. So this particular resource has a lot of uses, and in your resource guide that you will get emailed from Sarah Sleesman at the ADE, this will be in there for you. Okay, so we're going to read the standard, and I'm going to have you identify the embedded science and engineering practice, and then tell me if there are any appropriate science and engineering practices that you need to add to your sequence to get them to the overarching science and engineering practice in the standard. So again, here's our sample standard. Develop and use models to demonstrate the interdependence of organisms and their environment, including the biotic and abiotic factors. What is the science and engineering practice in this standard? Good. We have develop and use models. That is our science and engineering practice. And in the standards document, you'll see that it is bold. It is at the beginning of the standard, and it is there. Now, Looking at the standard, develop and use models to demonstrate the interdependence of organism and their environment, including biotic and abiotic factors. Is this the only science and engineering practice that they are going to use? Probably not. They may need to analyze and interpret data as they're using their model. Maybe they needed to obtain, evaluate information before they could even build their model. So I ask teachers to make sure that when you're looking at your unit and you're looking at specifically this one standard, to pick out all the science and engineering practices that are going to be important for you. And then I have them add it to their chart. So the foreground science and engineering practice is identified by the standard. So this standard science and engineering practice is right here. And this standard science and engineering practice is right here. There's extra information on here to help them in their unit blueprint for when they go to select resources on applications of the science and engineering practice. And this came from this information right here on the elements of the practice. So the foreground science and engineering practice is identified by the standard. All these background science and engineering practices that they identified as integral to helping them reach the rigor of the science and engineering practice that has been decided there. Okay, so let me know your thoughts. On a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you feel it is to identify the science and engineering practice, the foreground and background, when planning a lesson or a unit? Hi, Nick. I just noticed you were in here. Good. You guys see that in your blueprint. You are now setting your vision for students doing science. I love the way you put that. You are setting the vision in your mind for how students are going to be doing science while they're learning science. So here are 7 cross-cutting concepts. Because as you know, now we have 2 dimensions in our plan. We have the core ideas. We have the science and engineering practices, so we know what students need to know. We know what we want them to do, but now we need to think about how we're going to have students show their learning and show us what they know. And our cross-cutting concepts are patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion, and quantity, systems and system models, energy and matter, structure and function, stability and change. And we can find them in our standards underneath the learning progression column. You're going to see that some are bold and some are not. The ones that are bold are the ones that are identified as really important to this lesson or these series of standards. So in this example, in our 6th grade example, the cross-cutting concepts are patterns, cause and effect, system and system models, energy and matter, and stability and change. So 5 were selected by the working group. If you have other connections or students are making other connections to cross-cutting concepts and they're correct, encourage them to use those connections. I would ask teachers which ones do you see as really, really important to the lesson? Like you're going to see, or the unit, you're going to see this cross-cutting concept in almost every single lesson in the unit, put them in the foreground. If they are supporting cross-cutting concepts and they're still important, but they're maybe not in almost every single one, go ahead and put them in the background, but just know that they're there so that you can make those connections when necessary. And lastly, how do ideas about the using science, which are our U1, U2, and U3 coding in the standard, how does that impact the resources you're going to select? What is the lens that you're going to look at, how students are going to learn this topic? And put it on your plans so that you're always thinking about it. In this example of develop and use models, this standard is a U1, which is students are going to be gathering information, they're going to be learning about this topic, they're going to be using models, developing theories, and then they're going to be communicating what they've learned. If it was a U2, then they would be doing an engineering project, and that's something that you would want to know before you start planning your unit, is that students are not necessarily just learning about this topic, they're going to be developing something, an engineering project or solving a problem throughout this unit. Or is it a U3 and they're looking at the social, political, and monetary applications of science? And that's going to go. So Cheryl, I'll give you a moment to look at the difference between U1, U2, and U3. And again, the standard we are looking at is a U1, and you can see it right in the code. U1. So students are going to explain phenomena using evidence obtained from observations and or scientific investigations, and the evidence may lead to developing models and theories to make sense of phenomena as new evidence is discovered. And I have them add that to their blueprint right here at the bottom. So if this happened to be a U2, they would know throughout this entire unit that the end goal is that students are going to develop some sort of engineering product. And yes, Mary, the cross-cutting concepts in bold, going back to the cross-cutting concepts, are the same as the grade level focus. So for 6th grade, those would be the cross-cutting concepts that are in physical science, life science, and earth and space science. They're important to the whole grade level. High school does not have indicated grade level cross-cutting concepts because of just how in-depth the standards are, giving teachers free reign to select whatever is going to help them teach that particular unit or lesson best. So like I said, now you can take this image right here and all of this information and plug it directly into an electronic blueprint that you can have as a curriculum document, and it's going to help you as you go through the rest of the tools. I'm going to pull up that 3rd grade example and show you what it looks like in Arizona. Just give me a moment, and I'm going to have you look at this page while I'm doing so. At the American Museum of Natural History.org, There are all of the resources for the 5 tools and processes for translating, and for us it's the Arizona Science Standards, into instruction and classroom assessment. Because they're reaching a bigger audience, they're kind of looking at NGSS, but it's very easy to take that information and bring it to Arizona's standards. And here's what it looks like for Arizona. Okay, is that bigger? There we go. So here they're just looking at their life science standards, and they've put their standards into an instructional sequence, and it just so happens they went in order of 5, 6, 7, 8. They do not need to go in order. They understand their big ideas, but here I would also put the learning progression and really highlight those points that you highlighted and said were important and show what you crossed out. Then they have their foreground science and engineering practices, their background science and engineering practices, their foreground cross-cutting concepts, and they even put like help and reminders for them for what they mean. And I would do the same for the science and engineering practices up here. I just think they ran out of time for this day. They have their using science. It just so happens that every single one of their standards in this grade level for life science are a U1. And then they're starting their ideas on the big idea or sequence. They have them bulleted now, but later they would work and turn them into a statement so that they have this big idea and they can go find phenomena and create a storyline based on these big ideas for each instructional sequence. And this is their first draft of their blueprint. When we bring our teachers back again, they're going to edit this and make it cleaner and nicer, but for the time that they had, they did a really good job. And then when you get that resource guide, you're going to get Appendix F and Appendix G, which is the science engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts separated into those elements. And hopefully soon they will be on the Arizona Department of Education's website for everyone to use. The next webinar, Tool 3, will be taking that blueprint that you did and developing a conceptual flow so that you can now take that and find those resources. There is also an opportunity that I would like to share with you, and it's for middle school teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and we're going to be bringing AzSS to Arizona with a grant supplied by APS, the APS Foundation, and we're going to have teachers in grade level groups create sample units for everyone in Arizona to use. So if you would like to be a part of that process, it's a 1-year commitment next year, and there is a stipend for teachers to do the work to create full units for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. This information will also be in your resource. Applications are accepted until April 1st, and again, there'll be a link in your resource guide for that. So last share out, and then you guys can ask me any questions that you want. How is the unpacking process helpful to developing a unit blueprint? And what is the one thing you can take away and maybe use in your classroom tomorrow? It could just be a small, simple thing, small change. Michelle, was that the AZ sample or the large sample that is a blank template? Yes, Carol, I understand that looking into the cross-cutting concepts is still something that needs to be covered more in depth. And if you go to the ADE website, ASTA is giving a presentation on the cross-cutting concepts specifically, and I hear it is phenomenal. And maybe you could look into going to that particular professional development, and it's pretty inexpensive too. Maybe. I haven't heard of Fish and Game doing anything on PD, but maybe. I'm loving your takeaways. Good that you need to focus on what the research says should be taught versus what you would want to teach. This does give you a way to organize your thoughts so that you don't feel like you're all over the place with all the different components of the 3D instruction and getting all of those pieces in your mind before you begin to select resources or go further. And like I said at the beginning, this is not the only way to do this. This is just a really organized way that I could share with you guys and also give you all of the resources that I have for free in one spot. So like I said, this is just the blueprint. Really next we would write our evidence of learning statements, so we're not going to do a webinar on that one. And when you go to the American Museum of Natural History site, there are videos on each one of the tools. So go ahead and watch that video, and then we're going to come back together and do tool 3 and really look at building that storyline, creating that unit. Teachers who are in the singles the singletons, it is very complicated. I would see and reach out to other districts nearby if they have others who can help. Maybe this process can be done in very similar ways throughout grade levels, and you guys are supporting each other by going through the organization, but the items that you'll be putting into the boxes will be different. And if you have team members, even though they're not in the same grade levels, who are still committed to the process and still committed to creating the best units that you can for students, you guys can take the time and still work together and so that you can have ideas bounce off each other and still have those deep, meaningful conversations. And in a way, maybe that could be a plus, because now your different grade levels know exactly what's happening in the grade level before and where students are going in the grade level in the future. So that could actually be a benefit if you guys work together in that way. I know it's not ideal. Good question. So I have one more webinar of Tool 1, and that will be on, I think, the 28th. And then starting early April, I'll do 3 webinars on Tool 3. And then late April, May, I will start doing Tool 4, and that will get you the full unit plan covered. It does not cover the assessment part at the end. Tool 2 is evidence of learning statements, and that's kind of putting your thoughts of the end goal of the unit, exactly what students should learn in a statement that is easy to read for you and all teachers. And when you get, or you can even go to www.am, terrible with acronyms, amnh.org, and you can see all 5 tools at any time because there's no login, they're just free. Yes, when you go, and I can, if you guys want to take a second, I can show you how the website works here. Just pull that up. American Museum of Natural History. The website looks like this. Let's see if I go here if it'll take me. Okay. So when you first log on, you'll see the 5 tools here, and you can see that they have tool 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all laid out. We did tool 1. There's a video, and again, it is tailored towards NGSS, but we can very easily modify it for Arizona. Gives you the purpose, and then it gives you Tool 1, a facilitation guide. So if you were to go to one of their presentations, this is the actual facilitation guide that they use, and it gives all of their talking points and everything. Their PowerPoint slides on how they present Tool 1. All Tool 1 handouts, including a Tool 1 example. And then the Tool 1 template that is blank. And I made card decks for Arizona, but these ones are for NGSS, so these ones wouldn't be helpful to you. In the Tool 1 handouts, it kind of gives you everything that they would use in the training to help teachers understand Tool 1 and how to use it. Does that help? And they do that for all the tools. So they're all laid out there. And I'll be going through that information in the next couple webinars just so that you have someone to talk you through it. The cards are not yet in the resources sent by Sarah. I have to ask if that's a possibility for her to share out. So just give me a couple days on that one. Ask Sarah about them in a couple days, and then she'll contact me about that. So I did a search so Carol, when I went into, I just went into Google and I put in AMNH 5 tools, and then it brings me right to their site. So let me look at that with you. Oh, that one's the download. I'll go here. So I just want to Google American Disease and Natural History, 5 tools. See what I get. So then I go here to the 5 tools and processes. I click on this link right here for the 5 tools and processes, and then it brings up all of the tools on the side. I'm very excited for BSCS to come here to Arizona and go through this process with middle school teachers. And create real resources for Arizona teachers to use. I am just overly excited about this. Anytime. I'm glad you found this morning useful. Yes, when I found about this resource, I got to go to BSCS and I got to be trained by the trainers on this entire program. And every day I woke up in Colorado getting this training, I felt like I had won the lottery every single day. It was amazing. Because when these standards were developed and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much to think about, and then on day 1 I saw Tool 1 and I saw that this could be organized and streamlined, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to see. And it's free. So it was just a win-win. But I know that this isn't for everybody, and for some people this would be very difficult. But it was at least something that I could share out with everybody. Yes, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And hopefully this helped and didn't overwhelm. Carol, I don't remember, are you middle school? And if you are you SPED? And if so, I highly recommend you sign up to be a part of this process with APS and Arizona Science Teachers Association and ADE and create some of these units. If you don't have a team of 3 to 5, just email Sarah at the ADE, let her know that you are interested but you don't have a team. We can try to find someone. Yep, just email Sarah so that you have your name because you can't really fill out an application without a team. So we will figure out something for you. I agree, and I want to come up with a good team to help support teachers in Arizona who need that support. Yes, at my district we have a few middle school teachers who teach multi-grades too. The only way that I can think to do this is hopefully I can get enough people to create a team for 6th, 7th, and 8th. If not, then we're just going to have those 3 separate teams. If not, we're just going to have to focus on 1 or 2 grade levels. But at least there will be an example to follow for future units. And we can discuss that really unique situation and maybe help during the process figure out a way if you have 7th and 8th grade in one classroom, kind of how to make that work. Thank you guys. I'm so excited for everything that we are doing and the standards and all the work that you guys are doing to help make the standards from paper to be useful in your classroom. I appreciate all of your efforts, and please reach out or email if you have any questions. We don't want anyone to feel like they're alone in this process. We're all learning together. And if you find things that are useful or you realize that you really need help in a certain area, please let Sarah at the ADE know. She really wants to create these supports for all of you so that you feel like you are supported in this process. Have a great weekend.